Now the West often says that Islam oppresses women by telling them to dress modestly, to observe the headscarf or the hijab. But what could be more oppressing than young teenage girls of our time looking at fashion magazines, watching TV shows with models and actresses in skimpy clothing, then going to the washroom to induce vomiting after every meal just so that they can be size 0. Voluntarily agreeing to stay malnutritioned and wanting to get surgery on every part of their body just so that they can fit in with the society, just so that they can be acceptable in the eyes of men. I ask you, if this is not oppression, what is? And you know that everybody is in on it. It is found in all societies across the globe, thanks to the media, the TV, the magazines, and the movies. All they project to young women across the globe is that you need to look great in order to be acceptable. You need to expose yourself in order for people to think anything of you. Otherwise, you are worthless. You have no value that you can bring to the society. It is no surprise then that the necklines keep plunging, quite like the US economy, and the skirts keep getting higher and higher. If you look at Islam, it is the exact opposite to that. It teaches not to treat women as objects, but to respect them and value them for who they are inside. Just the same as you would respect a man. Just the same as you would respect or judge a man. Let people judge a woman by who she is inside. Not to let society tell her that she needs to display her body in order to be of any birth. An interesting research that is done by Susan Fisk, who is a professor of psychology at Princeton University. This research was done in February 2009 at the annual meeting of the American Association for the Advancement of Science in Chicago. She presented the results of her research. She told CNN that men view bikini-clad women or women in skimpy outfits as objects. This was the bottom line to her research. That men who look at women who are dressed provocatively, they treat them, look at them, view them as objects, not as women. And this is now not just a theory, science backs it up. And she describes the brain functions and the natural instinctive behavioral responses of men when they are faced with these situations. And she mentioned that she conducted the experiment, took a group of men and showed them some pictures, both of women wearing skimpy outfits and those who were covered modestly. And then they did an experiment of word association. And all the words that the men associated with the women who were provocatively dressed were words like push, grab, use, which means that this is like an object. And when they were shown the pictures of women who were dressed modestly, they used words like pushes, grabs, uses. What this research showed was that the women who were dressed in a provocative manner were viewed as objects that men could use, that men could control. Whereas the ones who were modestly dressed were women who were in control of themselves and which men considered as equals. These were the scientific findings of this research which was conducted at the beginning of this year, and which you can find on CNN.com, the exact details of it, of what were the actual parameters that were used to conduct this scientific experiment. Another study that was done by an Italian TV channel, where a group of men were asked to watch 2 news reports, after which they would be asked questions. One of the reporters that they were shown was a man dressed in a nice suit, and the other was a woman. She had her makeup on, she was fashionably dressed, maybe even slightly provocative. And after watching both the reports, when the men were questioned, their retention of what had been said in the news report for the male reporter was 90%. So they pretty much retained a lot of the information that was given to them when the male reporter was presenting his news report. But when they were asked about the female reporter, they could only retain less than 50% of what she said. And some of them even commented afterwards that they were too busy looking at her and her physique. This is a fact. This is what men do. And these experiments have proven this beyond the shadow of a doubt. Now in Islam, we know that men and women have been given an equal status. And even in the West, where they say that men and women are equal, their hypocrisy is evident. Why do you think that they have separate games for men and women? There is a men's 100 meters and there is a women's 100 meters. There is men's boxing and there is women's boxing. Why not put them both in the same ring? There is men's basketball and there is women's basketball. So their hypocrisy in this is evident. Although they may claim that men and women are equal, you know that they are actually not. I have here with me a Reader's Digest, which brings a special report saying that men and women are not the same, so why do doctors treat us that way? It's a report. This Reader's Digest is fairly new actually. It was July 2009. So in this report, they have described very clearly how men and women are different. And similarly, doctors should treat us differently because of our difference in our biological structure and development. You see, the Western media too, the Western countries too realize that physically, mentally and biologically, men and women have been created different. And Islam tells us that men and women have been created equal in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, equal but not identical. So this is what Islam says. It says that the rights that have been given to you in Islam, you have equal rights. They have been distributed fairly. You are equal in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, equal but not identical. Let me explain how that works. Sometimes men have rights over women, but also women have rights over men. And overall, they are equal. We take the example of two students who are appearing for an exam. Student A gets A grades in English and mathematics, whereas student B gets a B in both of these subjects. Similarly, student A gets B grades in science and history, whereas student B gets A grades in science and history. So overall, both students got 2 A's and 2 B's. But if you look deeply, you will find that the expertise of one of the students was English and math, and the expertise of the other student was science and history. In the exact same manner, the rights have been distributed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And He has given equal and fair rights to both parties. An important point to note here is that you could interpret the rights of women in Islam in two ways. You could, of course, do it by observing Muslims around the world, but that method would be slightly flawed. Because if you observe Muslims around the world, it will not be a true depiction of the teachings of Islam, because Muslims across the world sometimes do not follow the exact teachings of Islam. They mix in their own cultures with the teachings of Islam, thereby creating something that is not really Islam. The other approach could be by examining the Quran and Sunnah, that is the authentic sources of Islamic knowledge. That would be the appropriate manner to investigate what are the rights that have been given to women in Islam.